ABC General Hospital spoilers reveal that Michael stood at the center of a storm he helped create, yet no longer fully controlled. The future of Michael had narrowed into a single, suffocating question: how far would he go to keep custody of Wiley and Amelia? The responsibility of raising the children had once felt like a privilege, a sacred promise he believed he could protect forever. But as the legal tides shifted, and as alliances around him sharpened into threats, the comfort of that promise began to erode. The custody arrangement once firmly in his hands had become a battleground where every choice felt like a risk. Every hesitation, a potential loss. The weight of protecting Wiley and Amelia pressed against Michael like a constant invisible force. He understood that the fight was no longer just about who tucked them into bed or who signed school forms. This was about identity, lineage, influence, and control forces that had shaped the Corinthos family long before Wiley or Amelia were born. The anxiety of possibly losing them, of watching them slip from his grasp and into a world where he held no authority, was a terror he could barely admit aloud. The pressure intensified as Diane stepped deeper into the situation. Diane had always been sharp, ruthless, and unflinching in her methods. But now her strategy shifted into something more personal. She did not merely represent Michael, she challenged him. She dissected the choices he had made, the emotional blind spots he clung to, the arrogance that had grown around him as he assumed his custody rights were unshakable. Diane saw the vulnerabilities he refused to acknowledge, and she wielded them like tools. To her, Michael's fear of losing the children wasn't a weakness, it was leverage. She forced him to confront the truth. He avoided his relationship with Jacinda, his impatience with Willow, his reliance on legal supremacy rather than cooperation. Diane pressed upon him that control was not guaranteed, no matter how much influence the Corinthos name carried. The custody arrangement was shifting because the emotional realities behind it had changed. If Michael continued clinging to authority with a closed fist, he might very well lose not only the children, but also the moral high ground he desperately needed in court. Every session with Diane ignited a fresh explosion of tension, leaving Michael shaken angry, and more aware than ever that he could not simply bulldoze his way through this fight. Meanwhile, Willow became the wild card Michael never anticipated. Willow had once been someone he could predict, gentle, controlled, always choosing peace over chaos. But now that she had been cleared of wrongdoing, she was no longer restrained by fear or guilt. She stepped into this battle with a confidence Michael had underestimated, using strategy rather than emotion, negotiation rather than pleading. Her willingness to compromise was not a surrender, it was a calculated move meant to tilt the power dynamic back in her favor, and Michael felt it acutely. Their conversations grew sharper, more strategic, wrapped in a politeness that hid the tension underneath. Willow wasn't threatening him, not directly, but her every word reminded Michael that she now held cards he didn't. She had information alliances and public sympathy. She didn't need to fight him loudly. She only needed to fight him smartly. And the thought that Willow could expose Jacinda's past, derail Michael's position, or take the battle into the public eye terrified him more than he admitted. Michael found himself in a place he hated, negotiating from weakness. Willow's offer of compromise allowing shared custody if he severed ties with Jacinda wasn't just a condition. It was a test of his priorities. She was daring him to prove that the children mattered more than his pride, his desires, or the control he liked to believe was his by right. And beneath her calm exterior, Michael sensed something even more dangerous: Willow's readiness to escalate if he refused. The fear of losing Wiley and Amelia haunted him. It shaped every thought he had, every conversation he entered. Every night he lay awake, replaying decisions that had brought him to this moment. He saw the custody fight not as a legal battle, but as a collapse closing in on him. The children were his anchor, the proof that he was doing something right in a world filled with moral gray. Losing them would mean losing the best part of himself and the version of the man he wanted to be. Yet the other side of the choice was equally devastating: letting go of Jacinda. She represented something uncomplicated, something warm and hopeful during months when Michael felt isolated. Being with her made him believe he could have a life beyond legal struggles and parental obligations. But choosing her would mean risking the children. And though he would never say it out loud, Michael knew there was no world where Jacinda could win against Wiley and Amelia. The tightening of control around him, from Diane's precise pressure to Willow's strategic maneuvering, made the decision feel unbearably urgent. Everyone was pushing him toward a single path, a single outcome. One that forced him to sacrifice the part of his life that brought him comfort for the part that gave him purpose. He had reached a point where neutrality was impossible. Choosing nothing was still a choice, and it would cost him dearly. The temperature of the situation rose with every passing hour. Court meetings, lawyer calls, emotional confrontations behind closed doors, negotiations that felt less like conversations and more like battlefield strategies. Michael could sense the explosion building the moment when all the suppressed anger, all the tactical pressure, all the unspoken threats would ignite into something irreversible. When he finally admitted to himself that he would choose the children, the realization wasn't peaceful. It was painful, violent, and raw. It wasn't the noble choice he wanted it to be, it was survival. A desperate move made by a man boxed into a corner, running out of time, and terrified of losing the people who mattered most. Now, as emotions spiral and legal threats sharpen, Michael knows the hardest part is still ahead. Breaking things off with Jacinda, signing a compromise with Willow, stepping into a future where he must rebuild trust, re-earn stability, and accept the consequences of every decision that led him here. The fire has already been lit. The explosion is coming, and Michael, for the first time in a long time, is not sure he'll escape unscathed. Michael felt the walls of his life tightening around him, collapsing inch by inch as choices he had tried to avoid now stood in front of him like merciless judges demanding an answer. He once believed he held solid, unshakable control over Wiley, and Amelia convinced that his position as guardian, protector, and decision-maker was secure. But control is a fragile illusion, and as the situation twisted into something darker, sharper, and more complicated, Michael realized he was no longer standing on solid ground. He was standing on quicksand. Willow was no longer the gentle, predictable woman he once thought he understood. Something inside her had shifted, hardened, and sharpened into a new version of herself, one willing to wield Jacinda as a weapon. What Willow once avoided, she now used with ruthless precision. Jacinda wasn't just another woman in Michael's life. She was the pressure point Willow needed to break his balance. Every word Willow spoke carried a quiet threat, a calculated reminder that she could expose Jacinda's past at any moment, turning the media, the courts, and the entire city against Michael with one simple leak. Willow knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't shout or demand. She didn't need to. The true power of her threat lay in its calmness, its certainty, the knowledge that she could destroy Michael's custody case without lifting more than a finger. And Michael felt it. Every time Willow glanced toward him with that new steely resolve, he felt the weight of the war he was losing. He could almost hear the ticking of the clock counting down to the moment everything slipped away. For the first time, he realized Willow was not negotiating. She was positioning. And he was being cornered. Diane saw it too. She warned him, not gently, but with the direct cutting honesty she was known for. She reminded him that control could be stripped away in an instant, that arrogance was a weakness, that fear could blind even the smartest person to the danger standing right in front of them. Diane pressed him to understand that Willow's leverage was not theoretical. It was real. It was immediate. And it was devastating. Michael tried to resist it, tried to cling to the belief that he could fight back through legal strength or strategy. But every time he looked at the documents on Willow's side of the table, every time he heard Diane's tightly measured voice, every time he saw Jacinda's name written alongside words like evidence and exposure, he felt his resolve weaken like cracking glass. The most brutal truth was also the simplest. Willow held the power now, not him. In the middle of this chaos, Jacinda became the epicenter of Michael's emotional and strategic disaster. He cared for her deeply, maybe more deeply than he had allowed himself to admit. She was the one piece of comfort he had in this entire mess. The one place where he felt like a human being rather than a father trapped inside a legal cage. But that love, that comfort had become a liability. Willow understood that Jacinda was Michael's soft spot, and she dug her fingers into that weakness with chilling precision. The compromise Willow proposed, allowing her sole custody of Amelia while he kept Wiley, felt like a knife wrapped in. It was delivered with calmness, but its cuts were deep, slicing his life into pieces he didn't know how to reassemble. If he accepted, he would lose Amelia's childhood, lose a chance to watch her grow day by day, lose the right to guide her, hold her, or simply be the father she deserved. But if he refused, Willow would unleash the full force of her leverage, likely costing him both children. Choosing Amelia meant losing Wiley. Choosing Wiley meant losing Amelia. And hovering above both choices was the shadow of Jacinda, because Willow would never allow her presence to coexist. With the custody terms, Willow didn't have to say it aloud. The meaning was carved between every word she spoke: end things with Jacinda or lose everything. That was the moment Michael felt something inside him fracture. Because he knew deep down, painfully, brutally, that he would always choose the children first. The world expected him to. Diane expected him to. Willow expected him to. And yet the choice did not feel heroic. It felt like ripping his own heart out. The tension around him thickened like heat rising before a thunderstorm. Every conversation became a strategic maneuver. Every look from Willow, a warning. Every piece of advice from Diane, another push toward the inevitable. Michael could feel his control slipping away, not in a sudden collapse, but in slow, excruciating inches. He was being reshaped by forces stronger than his pride, stronger than his desire, and stronger than his ability to resist. His world was being rewritten, and he was powerless to stop it. And in that moment of crushing clarity, Michael finally understood the truth. This was no longer a custody battle. This was a reckoning. It was the unraveling of every illusion he had held. The dismantling of every decision he thought he had made for the right reasons. Willow had changed. Willow had evolved, and her new ruthlessness forced Michael to make the most painful decision of his life. He would sacrifice Jacinda. He would sacrifice his sense of control. He would sacrifice pieces of himself he never thought he would lose. Because at the end of it all, he could not bear to lose Wiley and Amelia. He could lose everything else but not them. And as the realization settled heavily into his chest, Michael knew the worst part was still ahead. The confrontation with Jacinda, the signing of papers, the fracture inside him widening until something eventually broke. The choices he was forced to make would define him forever. And none of them would leave him whole. A new wave of control was rising, reshaping the entire custody war and dragging Michael into a darker, more calculated version of himself. With Diane at his side, sharp as a blade and relentless in her strategy, Michael began to reclaim pieces of power he thought he had already lost. Diane understood the landscape far better than he did. She recognized that Willow had gained too much leverage too, quickly, and she was determined to break that momentum before it destroyed everything Michael had left. Their meetings became war rooms, their conversations transformed into tactical planning sessions. Diane pushed him to confront the truths he had been avoiding, the weaknesses in Willow's case. The emotional inconsistency she displayed, the traces of manipulation she left behind. She encouraged him to see the battlefield clearly. Not as a father drowning in panic, but as a man who still had the ability to strike back. And under her guidance, something dangerous woke up inside Michael. He was done accepting defeat. He was done allowing Willow to push him into corners. He was ready, desperate even, to take control again. That was when the idea of the trap formed quiet at first, but undeniable. A calculated move that could flip the entire situation, exposing Willow's tactics and turning public opinion against her. If Willow wanted to use Jacinda's past against him, then Michael would expose Willow's present, a pattern of coercion, emotional leverage, and manufactured threats. Diane saw the potential immediately. She knew that if Willow pushed too far, her attempt at gaining custody could be portrayed not as a mother fighting for her child, but as a woman using manipulation to gain control. And in a courtroom, perception could be more powerful than facts. This new plan awakened a darker determination in Michael. A hunger to win, a desire to reclaim authority not just over the legal situation, but over the narrative itself. He began to study Willow the way Diane did, watching her words, her hesitations, the way she tried to twist Jacinda into a weapon. Michael realized something unsettling. Willow's strongest weapon was fear. The fear of losing the children, the fear of public exposure, the fear of stepping into a spotlight she wasn't prepared for. And fear could be exploited. This realization sparked a new obsession in Michael, something he had never allowed himself to feel before. He could turn Willow's strategy against her. He could set a trap so perfectly constructed that she wouldn't realize she had walked into it until the doors closed. Around her. But with every new calculation, every whispered idea, every late-night strategy session with Diane, something inside Michael began to change. His moral center shifted, bending under the pressure of desperation and ambition. He felt a thrill he wasn't supposed to feel, a surge of satisfaction at the idea of outmaneuvering Willow, of watching her make the wrong move, of watching her fall into the trap he built. It was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. Slowly, the line between protecting his children and defeating Willow blurred, becoming a twisted knot of anger, fear, vindication, and obsession. Diane noticed the shift but didn't stop it. She saw that Michael was finally stepping into the aggression required to survive this fight. But she also saw the consequence. He was becoming someone else. Someone who no longer sought justice, someone who sought victory at any cost. This rising madness, this hunger to win, became a force neither of them could fully control. And as the trap took shape, the energy around Michael changed entirely. This was no longer a custody battle. This was a psychological war. And the terrifying truth was this: the deeper Michael sank into strategy and revenge, the more he realized he was not just fighting Willow, he was becoming exactly what he feared most. The calculations were rising, the obsession was growing, and the disaster waiting at the end of all this was no longer something he could avoid, only something he could unleash.